Suppose I said to you, God spoke directly to me and gave me 3 promises. How would you react to that? Well, I'm not saying that this morning, but Abraham could have said that, couldn't he? That God spoke directly to him and gave him 3 promises. He said to Abraham, I'll make of you a great nation. I'll give you a land in which to live. And through you, all families of the earth will be blessed. 430 years after that promise was made to Abraham, he had become the father of a great nation. It had developed in Egypt. But the nation that we know as Israel was held in captivity as it developed into the nation that it became. And the Bible story tells us not only how that nation developed, but how God delivered the nation from Egyptian bondage and brought it into the land of Canaan, which was the promised land, and how they dwelt there. Yes, with some interruption, but how they dwelt there for a few hundred years, and finally, the one who would bring the blessing into the world, Jesus Christ, came. The Bible really is about those 3 promises. But when I think of the development of that nation, I remember that God sent Moses into Egypt to be the deliverer. Moses led the children of Israel for about 40 years, and he brought them to the east side of the Jordan River. And just across the river, there was the promised land. But Moses died there, and the leadership of Israel fell to Joshua. And he's the one that we read about a few moments ago in the Bible reading this morning. Joshua became the leader of Israel. And it was through him that God would conquer the land of Canaan so that his people could dwell in it. Joshua was a great military mind. And when he led the people of Israel into the promised land, the first thing he did was cut it in 2 to weaken those who would defend it. And then he conquered the southern part of the land, and finally the northern part of the land, and they possessed it and dwelled in it. And the story of Joshua tells us even today this fact. Together, we are invincible. I want to begin by looking at a thesis. It's my thesis for this morning. A thesis is a proposition that is defended by argument. And I want to make the proposition and I want to defend it today. Stated, my thesis is this: when God dwells in the midst of his unified people, they are invincible. Now that's so important that I want to repeat it. I want you to see it as well as hear it, and some of you will be writing it down. When God dwells in the midst of his people who are unified, his people are invincible. And not only in the days of Joshua, but it's still true today. Now, I mentioned the word unified. When God dwells in the midst of his unified people, then they are invincible. For us today, we should learn that we need to stay close to the cross so that we can stay close to each other, because it's God's unified people that are invincible. Several years ago, I knew an elder in the church who over and over again would remind us that we needed to stay close to Christ. For he said, if you stay close to Christ, you will not be very far from your brethren. He was right about that, wasn't he? That we should stay close to the one who lived and died for us. That we should seek to become like him. That we should try to talk like him and think like him and act like him. And if we stay close to him, we'll always be close to each other. It's an important principle for us to remember. We need to be God's united people, staying close to the cross and close to each other. There's a great blessing that always flows into the lives of God's people when they're together. I like to be with other Christians. I look forward to the times that we spend together in assembly. I look forward to times when I can meet with you at other places. But I like to be with the children of God. And I want us as a congregation of people to make certain that our coming together is the coming together of a unified people. We come from many backgrounds. We're different in many ways. But the thing that holds us together is our relationship with Jesus Christ. When God dwells in the midst of his unified people, they are invincible. There is something altogether important about relationships. We need other people. God didn't make us as hermits. He made us as social beings, and we need others in our lives. There's something great about relationships. When we come together in assembly, we are demonstrating the relationship that we have with each other. And what we want to do here and what we want to say here needs to draw us closer together so that as one voice we praise and honor and glorify God. When God dwells in the midst of his people, when that people is unified, they are invincible. Now, let's return to our text and let's look for a moment at Joshua chapter 1. Because in this opening chapter of the successor to Moses, God, as he speaks to Joshua, teaches Joshua and he teaches us valuable and important lessons. Let's begin with the first verse that we read, Joshua 1 and verse 1. Because in this verse, we see the providence of God at work, because God is sovereign and he's always working out his plan and his purpose. And his providence is evident here. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, I just must stop there long enough to make this observation. When we leave this life and we go to live somewhere else, what kind of epitaph will we leave? And could you think of anything better than to be described like Moses was? Joshua 1 begins, after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord. There's so many things that could be said about Moses, but none greater than that he was the servant of the Lord. Now notice, it came to pass You see God in His providence working out His purpose. Now He has a special purpose for Joshua. He spoke to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now, therefore. When God uses therefore, always sit up and take notice, because something wonderful is about to take place based upon what has already taken place. Moses was a great leader. For 40 years he led the children of Israel, but Moses is dead. God's purpose is not. And He raises up Joshua by His sovereignty and by His providence and gives him a task. Moses, my servant, is dead. Therefore, arise. The second thing I learn here is that God always fulfills His purpose. Arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, to the land which I'm giving to them, the children of Israel. The third thing I learn here is that God always keeps His promises. Why is He giving them that land? Because He had promised to their forefather, Abraham, a long time before that was what He's going to do. God always keeps His promise. His promise of blessing or His promise of threat. He always keeps His promises. But then come to verse 5. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. You see, Joshua is going to operate by the power of God. And that's the fourth word. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. And that's the fifth word. God's presence. Now notice how this text unfolds. Verse 6 says, be strong and of good courage. Verse 7 says, only be strong and very courageous. And additionally, God says at verse 8, remember my law and remember to obey me. You be strong and you be courageous, but you remember my law to obey me, and I'll always be with you. Verse 9 says, have I not commanded you? Now watch again. Be strong and of good courage. Do not be afraid nor dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. When God dwells in the midst of His unified people, they are invincible. You go into the land, and it won't matter whether you're stronger than they are. Your strength is found in me, and I'm stronger than anyone, and I will give you a victory. And so Joshua led the children of Israel into the promised land. Did you know that the promised land was a gift from God? But God is going to teach Joshua and Israel an important lesson about gifts. A gift never accomplishes any good in anyone's life until it's accepted. Have you noticed that? A gift must be accepted. And God is giving them the promised land, but they must receive it, and they must receive it in the way that God asks. So let's look at the task that God gave to Joshua and to Israel. And I want to come over to Joshua chapter 6. Because this chapter tells us of the first city that Joshua and the Israelites defeated, captured after they came into the promised land. Joshua, I said a few moments ago, was a brilliant military mind. And so he had a strategy. And everybody went along with that strategy. There wasn't any resistance to it. They're unified. And they came to Jericho. Jericho was a fortified city with high walls on every side. And God said, I've given you this city. Now I want to tell you how to accept it. And strange words they were. I want you to take a portion of your army and put it out in front. After them, I want you to put the priests carrying their trumpets and blowing upon them with the Ark of the Covenant. And then I want the rest of the army, and I want the people to all walk around Jericho once on the first day. Second day, I want you to do the same thing. The third, the fourth. 6 days, I want you to go around the city. And as you go, don't say a word to anybody. I can only imagine what was going on in the city of Jericho when the Israelites were marching around the city. Those trumpets were being played. I wonder if someone in Jericho wasn't standing on the wall wondering what these people are doing. And we would have to agree, wouldn't we, that that is a strange military tactic. But on the seventh day, God had told them, I want you to march around the walls 7 times. And when you complete that 7th lap around the walls, I want the priests to give a blast on the trumpets, and all the people will shout. And they did, and the walls fell down. And they went in and took the city of Jericho. Joshua's strategy came from God, but did you hear anybody in Israel say, Joshua, what kind of a strategy is that? What can happen if we just march around the city and blow on trumpets? What can happen? We need to take an army over. They said none of that. They had Joshua's strategy without resistance. This is their task, to take the city. Well, after Jericho fell, the other people of the land, the other cities, were disturbed, to say the least, about what had happened. And do you know, the biblical record shows us that the people who lived in the land of Canaan had heard about the Israelites before. They had heard what the Lord had done with them in the wilderness, and they were fearful of them. Now come over to chapter 8. The second city that the children of Israel under Joshua would take was the little city of Ai. Now there's a sidelight here that when Jericho, the great city, fell to Joshua and the Israelites, God had told them not to take anything personally for themselves out of the booty that was there. And one man by the name of Achan took a little bit for himself. And when they came to Ai, because it was a small city, they thought they could just go up and take that little town by their own strength. And God said, don't go. They decided to go anyway, and they were soundly defeated. And they took the matter to God. And God said, there's sin in the camp. And you get rid of the sin, and I'll give you victory. And they got rid of the sin. And now in chapter 8 of Joshua, they have an objective. And it's without any jealousy on the part of anybody. When Ai is taken, nobody is going to care who gets the praise for it, because they're all in it together. There isn't any kind of jealousy. And here's how the city of Ai was taken. Joshua, remember I said he was a great military mind? He instructed some of his military men to go around to the side of the city and to lie in ambush. And he said, I'm going to take the rest of my men and I'm going to march on the gates of the city. And when the people of Ai see us coming, they're going to open their gates and send their fighting men out to meet us. And when they do, we're going to turn and run. And that's exactly what they did. And when Joshua and his men ran away, the men of Ai followed them. And after all the men were out of the city, those who were in the ambush came out, went into the city. There were only women and children remaining. They burned the city with fire. And then they approached the enemy from the rear, and so they were in a pincer movement. When the men of Ai saw their city was on fire, and they were in such a dire circumstance, it struck fear in their hearts. God was with Joshua and with Israel, and the people of the land of Canaan were frightened out of their wits. Now, let's come a little bit further to chapter 10. In chapter 10, the scripture says, now it came to pass when Adonizedek, king of Jerusalem, heard how Joshua had taken Ai and had utterly destroyed it, as he had done to Jericho and its king, so he had done to Ai and its king, and how the inhabitants of Gibeon had made peace with Israel and were among them. Now that isn't the end of the sentence, but let's stop there a minute. Everybody's afraid. They know what Israel and Joshua are doing. And the Gibeonites, a town not far from Jericho and Ai, they were fearful, and so they had a plan. They decided they would send some emissaries to meet Joshua, and that they would dress them in old worn-out clothes and old worn-out shoes, that they would give them wine bottles that were old and bursting at the seams. They would pretend that they had come from a far-off country, and they would come to make peace with Israel. And Joshua and Israel failed to take the matter to God as to what they would do with these people. And as a result, they believed their lie. And God was not pleased with all of that. And so Gibeon was made slaves to Israel. They didn't kill them because they had made a pact with them, but they made them servants. Now the king of Jerusalem knew all about that. He knew about Jericho and Ai. He knew about the Gibeonites. And so he pulled together 4 other kings, and they formed their armies, and they decided that they could go and meet Joshua. That's the setting of Joshua chapter 10. And in this encounter, there is trust without doubt. When the king heard that the inhabitants of Gibeon had made peace with Israel and were among them, they feared greatly, because Gibeon was a great city, like one of the royal cities, and because it was greater than Ai, and all its men were mighty. And they decided, we'll just go over and destroy Gibeon for making that alliance with Israel. And Gibeon sends a message to Joshua, come and help us. And here's how chapter 10 continues. So Joshua ascended from Gilgal he and his mighty men of valor. And the Lord said to Joshua, do not fear them, for I've delivered them into your hand. Not a man of them shall stand before you. Joshua therefore came upon them suddenly, having marched all night from Gilgal. So the Lord routed them before Israel. And it happened as they fled before Israel and were in the descent of Beth Horon, that the Lord cast large hailstones from heaven on them as far as Azekah, and they died. And there were more that died from the hailstones than the children of Israel had killed with the sword. God was giving Joshua and Israel great victory because they trusted instead of doubting. And something extremely unusual happens here, in addition to the fact that God sent those hailstones. Joshua wants to finish the battle. He wants to finish the victory, but daylight was fading, and he asked the Lord to make the sun stand still. And God caused the sun to stand still for a whole day. Remarkable indeed. Now, I want to go back to the opening chapter of Joshua, and then I'll close the lesson today. Come with me to Joshua chapter 1. After God said to Joshua, I'm going to be with you, you just remember to obey my law. Down in verse 16, he lays out before Joshua and Israel all that we've just been talking about. And Israel is united in their task, and they are without fear. Notice verses 16 to 18. So they answered Joshua, saying, all that you command us, we will do. And wherever you send us, we will go. Just as we heeded Moses in all things, so we will heed you. Only the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. At the end, they said exactly what God had earlier said, be strong and of good courage. I want you to notice these four words. Notice the cooperation. All that you command us, we will do. Notice the availability. Wherever you send us, we will go. Notice the commitment. Just as we heeded Moses in all things, so we will heed you. And notice their faith. The Lord will be with you as he was with Moses. Now, as we come to the end of this year and we look forward to a brand new year, let's make some resolves as a church. Let's resolve that we're going to believe that God in our midst makes us invincible. And let us therefore resolve that we're going to be united as one people. And united as one people, let us make the resolve that we'll be loyal and true to every word that God has said to us in the Bible. And in our loyalty to Scripture, let's be loyal to each other. And let us give ourselves to the task that God has put before us without any fear. Let us be strong and courageous. And who knows what the new year may bring to us. Because we really do believe, don't we, that when God abides with his unified people, they are invincible. There's nothing that God wants to do with us and through us that will not take place if we'll be loyal to God and to each other. What do you say about that? Would you go with us on this journey? Would you accompany us on the way? We're in this for God and His glory and for our salvation. Would you go with us? If you haven't yet become a Christian, would you consider doing that today? Would you answer the call of Christ and His invitation? As a penitent believer, would you confess the name of Christ and be immersed in water for the forgiveness of sin? Will you go on the journey with us? If you're here this morning and you're not a member of this church family, but this is where you want to worship, let that be known so that we can join hands and hearts together. Because when the Lord is in the midst of His unified people, they are invincible.